Good afternoon or evening, everybody. Welcome back to another weather forecast by Adrian's Weather Forecast. And it's going to be another update here on Hurricane Sam, as Sam has now rapidly intensified and is now a 75-mile-an-hour hurricane, and likely to continue this rapid increase and steady pace of it in overall strength in the organization right now. And of course, the National Hurricane Center has now upgraded their peak to a Category 4 hurricane. So we are watching out for a very strong storm. And probably this will most likely be stronger than Hurricane Larry, as though there are a few model runs that are possibly showing a little bit more of a U.S. threat. So we're overall watching out that for the East Coast, and whether there could be maybe a slight threat towards the United States with changing models. But before we get in the video, I recommend you guys subscribe to the channel, smash that like button, and as well hit the bell icon. But without further ado, let's get in the video. So a lot of this video is going to be obviously on Hurricane Sam, but we do have a few other AOYs we have to keep a close eye on. We now have a new AOY up here, which is a 70%. Yeah, a new one, which is now actually 90% for the next 48 hours and 5 days. So we actually may get a tropical storm, or even maybe, who knows, tropical storm Teresa. So this actually was a 10% yesterday, and now it's a 90-90. So I'll have a more in-depth video on that tomorrow, but I'm a little bit kind of tight on time right now, as I have a football game to go to, so I'm going to mainly just be focusing on Hurricane Sam, but I will be looking at this in the overall models. But again, recent visible satellite imagery indicates that a well-defined center has formed with a surface load located a couple hundred miles northeast of Bermuda, interacting with an upper-level trough. In addition, the low are producing gale force winds on the north side of its circulation. Additional development into a subtropical storm is now expected, and advisories will likely be initiated this afternoon as the system moves slowly towards the north-northwest. So this could very well become a tropical depression as early as today. And then, of course, we now have a 50% for the next 5 days on that new AOI, which is obviously again likely to emerge off Africa within the next 3 days or so. So this could as well be another named storm. So could we get letter T? And who knows, maybe even the next letter before October. So could we very well get to the auxiliary list by the first week of October? And of course, Hurricane Sam, or Sam's now a hurricane at 993 millibars, 75 miles an hour is its current strength. It actually became a 75-mile-an-hour storm way overnight yesterday, so it's actually been at a pretty steady pace today. And I'll get into the reasoning why it's been at a steady pace later in the video. But here's the overall look at the forecast peak. And of course, a peak now of 130 miles an hour, so likely to become a very monster storm. Of course, looking at continue to see IOR replacement cycles, looking at extremely tight and coiled outer bands and a small but very cold central dense over forecast. So we are still seeing a CDO, but a smaller CDO, a little bit more broad into a certain area. But of course, this is what we have so far on Hurricane Sam. It's hard to think that Sam looked completely different 24 hours ago, basically just becoming a tropical storm, and now it's a 75-mile-an-hour raging hurricane, likely to become a Category 2 by the next maybe 12 hours or so, as it continues now as it's been holding off today because of dry air, which is just to the north of the system. You can kind of see the little bit of that dry air basically just north of that system. That's why those waves, or that's why those clouds are all poofy and wavy like that, because there is some very intense dry air. But now this storm has started to get its act together as we get into the overnight hours, so likely to see a very strong diurnal maximum. But this storm is looking really good, extremely strong counterclockwise flow, and it's like a concentrical system as you go. I'll show you guys an A-scan and the overall data. It looks like a concentrical storm, looks quite symmetrical. It's definitely becoming a lot better than what it looked like earlier on. There you see kind of the overall layers of that extremely dense cloud cover and overall strengthening of those winds, but really good core right here. Really, really intense eye wall. I mean, this storm is most likely about to go through an eye wall replacement cycle as it continues to now move to the very favorable waters, and as well, even this cloud cover is really expanding with the upper level anticyclone here, the upper level high, obviously on top of the system. We are seeing a stacked system right now, and this is why we are seeing such great outflow as well divergent flow. So we actually are seeing a clockwise flow within those divergent cumulus clouds from the upper level anticyclone. So this storm just looks like an absolute beautiful looking storm. Of course, it's definitely making its way towards a Category 2 hurricane with extremely strong inflow. Obviously, really clear outflow within that ULAC, and that's what really sharp cutoff between the banding and the eye wall from the eye from the as well the inflow. But this looks like a really good storm. So here's the developing CDO. Again, there is a small CDO developing here, of course, across towards the actual low pressure itself. But of course, there is some dry air, which is just to the north of the system. Actually, it was a lot more intense earlier on today, so that's kind of been the reasoning. And you can kind of see it as well wrapping around, trying to wrap around. There is really intense dry air, basically just towards the east, or just to the west of the system. There is that really intense dry air trying to kind of wrap it around this system. So there's the overall moisture bubble. There is the central dense forecast, but that's kind of why it's been leveling off and not continuing that rapid intensification phase all day today. But of course, likely that conditions will get better in the overnight hours. This is the latest ASCAT data, as well as seeing really intense winds supporting of 65 knots, which is 75 miles an hour, and as well picking up as low pressure as low as 993 millibars. So there's the overall there of that low pressure where we're seeing the weakest, obviously, winds. But here's the latest pass. It's not completely a full pass. We don't really have much data on the eastern quadrants, but we get a really good idea that the northwest quadrant is becoming extremely tense. I mean, look at those wind bars. We're having at least 5 dashes or at least 5 lines indicating over 60 or around over 60 knots winds, and at this point it's 65 knots, but really intense. You can see it's a really cold, tight, and just overall cold core system. It's got a really good core. It's got a really good developing eye wall, of course, with the really intense winds at a very strong and overall rapid counterclockwise flow. So this storm looks like an absolute beauty. Although this data is still a few hours old, it's still signaling and signifying and overall just representing the overall structure of the system. And like I said, this kind of looks like a concentrical system. Here's the overall look at what I mean. So let's now get into the 91 color. You can kind of just see the layer. So here's the overall, actually that's the wrong color. I should probably maybe use black instead. Here's that kind of the first layer right there, the overall outer banding. There's the other layer. You kind of just see it looks like a snail. It looks basically kind of very well concentrical. You see the multiple layers within this system right here. You can just see the multiple layers, and it kind of looks concentrical. That's kind of what it looks like. You can see really clear, strong inflow. It kind of like this is kind of more of an echo, hook echo, something like that. It's like you typically see in a supercell like that. That's kind of the overall structure of the system. We're seeing that really intense inflow this way, and then seeing that very intense outflow coming out this way. So you're kind of seeing that really intense upper level anticyclone spreading out those cumulus and overall convection, and there's a very intense wrapped and obviously fully closed low circulation, with obviously strengthening and most likely to start clearing out overnight. Here's the latest look now at the National Hurricane Center forecast code, and as you can tell, this system has become a lot more symmetrical, like I said earlier in the video, and obviously it's going to start to really expand its wind fields obviously further in almost every direction, as there's really no limiting factors in the upper levels to prevent any initiation and to make this storm lopsided. So likely to become a major hurricane by tomorrow night. So likely to be made a completely different category by tomorrow, and likely, like I just said, to become even a category 4 by the weekend. So where obviously the weekend is basically like tomorrow. It's only 75 now. It's basically 1 mile an hour from being a tropical storm, but we're talking about a category 4 within less than 2 days. So this is definitely a really intense, obviously rapid intensification we're talking about. And the reasoning why it's going to be rapidly intensifying so quickly is because look how close these are. This is basically 12 hours. This is 12 hours of movement from here to here. That is a really slow moving storm. And the reasoning why this storm is moving so slow is because that ridge is so far northeast off the coast of Portugal that there's really little forcing whatsoever within the steering from the high pressure. So due to that, there's very weak trade winds and very weak forcing. So that's why the storm is moving so slow. It's just taking its time because there is no force that's actually pushing the storm at a fast speed. If this low pressure or this high pressure were a lot closer, maybe off the coast of Morocco or Cape Verde Islands, then we'll be talking about a more average type storm moving 14 plus miles an hour. But the only thing kind of really keeping the storm going the way it is the easterlies. But the reason why it's going to start going towards the northwest is because that extreme rapid growth and obviously rapid intensification. Now models are showing this high pressure starting to move a little bit more southward as the storm continues to go westward and kind of west-northwestward, so that will impact as well. As this high pressure gets closer, then it'll eventually start doing a northwest turn. Obviously, it's kind of really far out, but there is a few model runs that are showing possible threat towards the United States, but we'll get into that in the very end of the video. Here's the overall look now at the reasonable arrival time of tropical storm force winds. And yesterday, the Western Antilles and the overall portions of the Windward Islands were not actually in a percentage, but now they are actually into a 10 to 20% chance that's most likely going to continue to rise as this storm gets closer and closer and closer and starts to expand its wind field further and further and further. So we could see maybe some tropical storm wind gusts, but likely due to this potential strengthening all the way to Category 4, it's going to stay a few hundred miles away from this vicinity. So obviously it's likely that we're just going to get some gusts and maybe some overall minimal urban flooding, but other than that, it's not going to be too crazy for the Caribbean. Obviously, the means have completely jumped in extreme strength now. They're obviously no longer, not a single ensemble is now showing a landfall in Puerto Rico, and actually they're showing a huge dip to the northwest, not even becoming a threat. I mean, we're talking at least like 500 miles away from Bermuda, so this is actually taking a huge, basically due to north turn because of this rapid intensification, because look, there's actually a few ensembles that are getting sub 940 millibars, so with this extreme strengthening, that's going to be the reasoning why it's going to be going such a northwest rate so quickly, even due northward. So not a single ensemble now shows a landfall towards the Caribbean, which is showing overall starting to see more greens. And obviously, as these models start getting stronger and stronger and stronger, they're going to get further out to sea. Here's the overall look now at the intensity guidance, and obviously they're now a lot more showing our Category 4, and actually one is showing a Category 5. So that's obviously very, very intriguing, but that's a COTI. But there it is right now at 70 miles an hour, likely to really start continuing to strengthen to a Category 2 overnight. And then these ensembles are still showing kind of stabling it off at a very strong Category 3. But of course, the National Hurricane Center has now pushed it towards a Category 4. So like I said yesterday, likely there could be a chance for a Category 4. 130 miles an hour is predicted as of now, which is basically right at the line of Category 4. So it's just a Category 4. So we're watching out overall for a pretty strong storm. And obviously, it's going to impact the stream just a little bit, whether it's a Category 3 or Category 4. Just a teeny bit, though, but it's not going to make any big dramatic factor changes or anything like that. But obviously, going to continue to see if ensembles continue to go in that upward and growth scale change, and that upward growth, basically, where they continue to really go crazy on these model intensities. Because yesterday, I think only one showed Category 4, now 3 show Category, actually, no, now 4 have, no, actually 5. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 have Category 4 now, so that's obviously better than 1, so we're starting to see some upscale growth. So a reason why this storm has kind of started to level off a little bit today is not really because of shear, but it's actually because of the dry air. Like I showed you guys in the overall water vapor, there is some dry air trying to wrap around the system, but this is strong and overall prominent tropical wave and tropical trough is not letting go. This is obviously in a pretty favorable environment shear-wise, but there is an area of over 30 knots, which is just north of the system. But of course, it's still, this whole low pressure and its whole system itself is still within an area of less than 10 knots. And it's going to continue to move in a very, very favorable atmosphere of less than 10 knots. So again, shear-wise, there's not going to be anything limiting this overall initiation or making it lopsided. The only threat that we're actually watching out for is dry air, but due to the fact that this is going to continue just overall strengthen, it's going to the overnight hours, it's moisture bubble, it's CDO, and its overall core is going to continue to strengthen, so I don't think anything's going to really get into the system or weaken it or even stabilize it much longer. I think at this point, it's going to start going into a second wave of this rapid intensification. At this point, it's probably as well going to start going into an Iowa replacement cycle, and that's just going to increase the chance of it going through a pretty intense during a maximum by the early morning hours, 4 to 5 a.m. AST time. So going to definitely be very interesting what we wake up to tomorrow morning. Let's now go ahead and look at the GFS. So they have it now at 982 millibars within 18 hours. So they're continuing to really extreme strengthening. And I mean, now they have it at 957 millibars way before the Lesser Antilles. So talking about a extreme northwest turn, 963, then starting to weaken a little bit. So that now they actually take it far, far, far east. Or yeah, far east of the Bermuda. So actually GFS is continuing. So the overall strengthening phase. So the GFS is actually not one of the models that is actually having this getting close to the U.S., but there's as well as a low pressure that the National Hurricane Center highlighted with that 90%. There is an overall prominent low right there, and there is a Canadian ridge kind of really keeping the AOY right here, the remnants of Odette, and as well the 90% kind of pretty slowly moving across the North Atlantic. but 1,010 millibars, and then it kind of just gets really just picked up by the subtropical jet. So GFS does not have too much with that new AOI, but they actually do have something very interesting still within that latest AOI, or that older AOI at 50%, which is now 50%, but they no longer have it becoming like a tropical storm. They actually just having it at 1,005 millibars and remaining pretty broad. However, the CMC is taking a little bit more different approach, and actually they're actually a little bit scary for the people who live in the Northeast there. So here they don't really have much development going on. Maybe tropical depression, but about maybe a subtropical storm that's going to be a little bit on the lower probability. But 1,009 millibars, 1,008 millibars, and then quickly gets picked up by the subtropical jet. But there's a CMC now having a lot more development than they've had throughout the whole history of Hurricane Sam. But again, they still have it only being 996 millibars within 42 hours, but this is already 993. So not only are they way behind, but I mean, this is going to really impact the overall cone because they only have it at 984 within a whole, basically, 4 days. So that's probably why the CMC is still really getting it super close toward the U.S. Virgin Islands. And then they actually have a very, very interesting setup. Watch this. Watch this high right here, or these two highs. This is a really strong Canadian ridge setup. I mean, that's actually a really strong setup. So it's going to basically kind of set up like that. That's the exact, actually it's going to be more like this. It's basically the setup right here. There's going to be a really strong Canadian ridge set up across the Northwest Atlantic. And what that's going to do is that's actually going to block, it's going to kind of act like as a blocking high pressure. It's so strong. It's got a huge effect there, really extremely high pressure. And what it's going to do is cause a bending in this ridge. That's actually going to stay pretty stationary, so it's not going to get kind of pushed around as if it was a weak ridge. This is 1,030 millibars, a pretty large, intense area of high pressure, so it's actually going to force Sam to actually go anywhere but just about westward and hitting the Boston area at 970-ish millibars. So that's actually very scary for those who live in New England, but I would not worry about it too much because I feel like the GFS is going to be more reasonable because the GFS actually has a reasonable pressure while the CMC is still at, let's see here, I mean, it's still at, let's see here, 900, and they actually only have it at 1,006 right now. So they have it going pretty close to the Northeast because of their really slow development. So that's why I wouldn't really be too concerned about the year or about the CMC, just because it's obviously pretty unreliable at this point because they have it still in the 4 digits for pressure right now. So that's always going to push more towards a east or a west biased track, while the GFS seems to be more reasonable, kind of like that. So I would not worry for the Northeast. I mean, although I said there's an increasing threat according to the models, but I still wouldn't really worry about it too much. But here's the overall now look at the European. Really tight core there, overall strong trough, and the European kind of still stays pretty similar towards the CMC. However, they don't get it actually hitting the New England, but they actually have it getting pretty close compared to the last runs. So that's why the European CMC are a little bit concerning for those who are monitoring this system in the Northeast. But really strong upper level anticyclone according to the GFS. I mean, we're seeing at least 3 outflow channels within the system. So that's going to be preventing any threats or shear, even though there's really not much going on. And a very interesting fact is that this shear is actually going to start moving in a very similar direction, actually the same direction as this flow. So it's actually going to help generate this overall spin and flow. Actually, it's going to generate it. Furthermore, actually allowing this system to strengthen. And then, of course, there you see a really intense ridge setting up, but not as large or intense or even far north as the CMC. But there it is, basically going out like that. And while let's now look at the CMC really quickly here. Let's now look at the CMC, what they have and what their setup is for 200 millibars. So this is 200 millibar shear for the CMC. Obviously, they basically like no very, very weak upper level anticyclone with very weak outflow until eventually later on. But there you see a really strong, I mean, this is actually a really strong trough setting up like that. And that's going to allow for an extremely strong ridge to really set up across the Northwest Atlantic and off Newfoundland. So there's a really intense low pressure, huge, strong, looks like a more of a negative tilted trough right here. So looking at a really strong negative tilted potential long wave trough, or actually more like short wave trough, dipping like that. That's going to allow for 2 high pressure systems that are going to just be acting like a blockade system. So as this system continues to go northward, actually, it's going to get pushed by this really strong ridge. and this trough is actually not going to typically do what it usually does, and it's actually not going to be steering it up out to sea fast because there's a huge, strong tube blocking high pressure, so it's just going to block it, and it's actually going to do like what Henri did and actually go around the trough itself, get bended a little bit, but actually dip like Henri did, because Henri, there was a similar setup where obviously there is a trough like that and a strong ridge, and it actually just bended around the trough itself. So that's very similar, or very similar in my opinion, what Henri did. But I hope you guys enjoyed the video, and I'll see you guys later.